much of our monitoring and reporting and some of our research support policy. But the series of toolboxes for individuals and communities now emerging from CCL includes a number of interesting items. We've talked about the Composite Learning Index, which is supportive of the drive to establish learning communities in Canadian cities. We now have the online adult literacy assessment tool, which I hope you've seen, that allows confidential, individual, and self-directed assessment of adult literacy levels of individuals. And I think we're the first country in the world to put that up online. The Learning Infoway, which is still under development, will be designed to permit individuals at any income level, educational level, or region in Canada to access in one electronic space all the information required to chart their own learning pathways. We have what we call the Adult Literacy Market Segmentation Study, which divides the populations of people below the internationally accepted literacy level into segments so that each is susceptible of individual treatment because, of course, people below that line are very different in terms of their needs. And CCL's series of short electronically published articles entitled Lessons in Learning, which provides evidence-based and informed reviews of learning topics that are important to individuals and their families. So these are the ways we've tried to link policy and everyday concerns. Coming to the issue of the investment in human infrastructure, and particularly in turbulent economic times, the argument for emphasis on learning and the role and support of that we can all play, I think scintillates even more during these tumultuous economic times. We've said publicly on several occasions during this current economic crisis that the road to economic recovery is not just about filling potholes and repairing bridges. It must include a plan for skills infrastructure as well. Our argument is the following: human infrastructure will help us to respond both to immediate crisis and to ensure sustainable growth. That is, the conditions for future success. That, we argue, is how you build a resilient workforce. The ability to anticipate change and adapt to the new economic context. We characterize human infrastructure in relation to learning not as an afterthought when all the other necessary investments have been made. In both the short and the long term, learning creates the skilled workforce needed for the country's prosperity. In a time of heightened pressure on government purse strings, it reduces burdens on the healthcare system through improved health literacy. It reduces crime rates. It stimulates economic growth through increased productivity and innovation. As an example, adult literacy affects GDP more than most other investments. Research indicates that a 1% rise in literacy produces a 1.5% increase in GDP per capita and a 2.5% improvement in labor productivity. I met yesterday with the mayor of Montreal, and he was scribbling down these numbers because I think he's, and I hope he will, use them in his upcoming election campaign. When we emerge from this downturn, we will have an even more pronounced shortage of critical skills. Engineering, health professions, skilled trades, high tech, unless we use this period that this reduced economic pace now affords us. In this country, there's a gap between skills and jobs. And I would argue that we cannot have jobs without people and people without jobs. Well, if you do all of those things, how do you know if you're making progress? This is very important to us at CCL. Because human and learning infrastructure and architecture is not just about spending more money. It is about spending smarter. So we require a set, actually many sets of clear, shared, and agreed indicators and measures to allow for continuous national assessment of progress and performance towards those accepted goals. The European Union, which is often a reference point for me with all its warts, furnishes an example of that which we must achieve in Canada with respect to goals. 16 indicators on education and training in the EU are agreed and common to the member countries, including information and communications technology skills, language skills, often for adults, mobility of students across the EU, adult skills, investment in education and training, number of graduates from higher education, proportion of GDP expended on research and innovation, and others. Those are their indicators. They have benchmarks and targets. These benchmarks and targets are held in common across Europe, not just in any one country, in common across Europe, and are measured and reported publicly for the EU as a whole and for each member country. So for example, targeting for 2010, next year, a 15% increase in the number of tertiary graduates in mathematics, science, and technology. They've targeted for adult participation rates in lifelong learning programs an increase of 12.5%. Next year, we'll see the report for the whole of the EU and each member state as to whether they've achieved that adult participation rate increase in adult learning programs. Not all EU goals will be achieved, either for the Union as a whole or for each country within it. However, it is the very process of establishing targets and reporting transparently on them that will drive Europe forward in their building of human infrastructure. So then the question arises, and certainly at some of the talks I've given, what could Canada accomplish immediately to improve our human infrastructure? I think I have 6 points or 7 points here. First, we can acknowledge and assert that human and skills investment is a public good every bit as important as machines and buildings. That very assertion will give people hope. Secondly, we can invest in tools that will assist Canadians to determine their own learning levels and needs and to act on them, thereby helping them adjust. I've given examples in CCL's work to develop the online literacy assessment tool and the Adult Learning Knowledge Centre's contribution to a national understanding of the potency of health literacy and literacy generally are examples of such instruments that individuals need. This network fulfills a real need. Third, partnerships can be created with industry, especially small and medium-sized businesses, to improve immediately the provision of workplace education and training opportunities, especially basic skills like literacy. And we can organize for independent and public reporting on the results for each industry and firm, as is done in the UK. Industry sector councils can be of crucial support in this regard. Fourth, we can commit to common information systems on post-secondary education and skills beyond colleges and universities to replace the outmoded and inefficient patchwork we now have. Fifth, and I've mentioned this already, but it's so important, we can commit to common goals, benchmarks, and targets using accepted measures for success in key areas and committing to public reporting on their attainment. What is the increase in adult learning opportunities and uptake of those opportunities that we target for the next 3 years? Let's set goals and let's assess the achievement of those goals. Sixth, we can provide full cross-Canada mobility for all students, occupations, and professions, including and especially a comparable information base across Canada and a shared apprenticeship platform. I was on a bus last year from one province to another in the Atlantic region. I had sitting behind me a young man who was complaining to a grandmotherly figure beside him that he was on his way from New Brunswick to Nova Scotia, but didn't think that he would get accredited there for the apprenticeship that he'd done in New Brunswick. That's an example that's very current throughout Canada. So parting thoughts, and I would be very pleased to take questions. In a knowledge society, knowing how to learn is perhaps the quintessential skill. Our aspiration is that we assist, and we can assist in creating those optimal learning conditions. I don't speak of best practices because I don't believe that they exist. There are useful practices and promising practices, but I do think that we can create optimal conditions for learning that people then can take up. Our voice, the voice of CCL, our contribution nationally is, I would argue, only a modest constituent part of what we hope will be a growing harmony of efforts to move up the Canadian learning curve. Merci beaucoup.